The scariest person in school was the first one who ever looked at me like I mattered. That was the thought that kept replaying in my head every time someone asked how everything started, because if you had told me a month earlier that I would willingly sit beside Logan Carter, I would have laughed and walked away. Everyone at Westbrook High knew his name, even the freshmen who had only been on campus for a week. Teachers sighed whenever they saw him walking through the hallway. Students stepped aside without thinking, and rumors seemed to follow him like shadows that never disappeared. Some people claimed he had been suspended more times than anyone could count. Others insisted he enjoyed breaking every rule the school had ever written. I never believed every rumor I heard, but I knew enough to stay out of his way. My life worked best when it stayed predictable. I showed up early every morning, carried homemade strawberry jam sandwiches my grandma insisted on making, earned decent grades, and kept smiling even when the day felt longer than it should. That was exactly why my friends had started calling me Sweet Strawberry back in middle school. They said I was too nice, too cheerful, and impossible to annoy. I didn't mind the nickname. It reminded me of summer afternoons helping Grandma pick strawberries at her little farm just outside town, where the air smelled sweet and the only sounds were birds and the wind moving through the fields. School, on the other hand, smelled like floor wax, cafeteria pizza, and stress. On that Monday morning, everything felt normal until the final bell before lunch echoed through the building. I turned the corner near the old gym, balancing a stack of history books against my chest, when I noticed a crowd gathered outside one of the side exits. Nobody was yelling. Nobody was cheering. They were simply watching. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took a few careful steps closer. Logan Carter stood alone near the fence, his backpack resting on the ground beside him, while another student hurried away without looking back. Logan never chased him. He never raised his voice. He simply watched the student disappear before picking up the backpack and walking toward the parking lot with an expression that was impossible to read. For just a second, our eyes met. I expected anger. I expected arrogance. Instead, I saw something closer to exhaustion, the kind you only notice when someone forgets the rest of the world is watching. Then he looked away as if I had never existed. I should have forgotten about that moment. Instead, it stayed with me all afternoon. The next morning, I walked into English class ready for another ordinary day until Mrs. Harper smiled far too brightly and announced that the seating chart had changed. My classmates groaned while everyone searched for their new desks. I followed the list on the projector, traced my finger across the rows, and felt my stomach drop. My new seat was in the very back of the classroom, right beside Logan Carter. I stood frozen beside the last row while the rest of the class found their new seats with little more than a few complaints. Logan did not even bother looking up from the notebook lying open on his desk. He lazily spun a pencil between his fingers as though the entire classroom existed somewhere far away from him. Mrs. Harper cleared her throat and gave me an encouraging smile. "Go ahead, Ethan. That seat is yours." I forced my feet to move, slid into the empty chair beside him, and carefully placed my books on the desk. Not a single word came from Logan. He simply continued staring out the window where the football field shimmered beneath the late morning sun. I had expected sarcasm, an annoyed comment, or at least a warning to stay out of his space. Instead, there was only silence. Somehow, that made me even more nervous. The class began discussing classic American literature, but I caught more than one student glancing toward the back of the room. A few whispered behind their hands. One girl actually looked sympathetic, as though I had just received terrible news. During group discussion, Mrs. Harper paired us together without hesitation. "You will be partners for the semester project," she announced. A chorus of quiet reactions spread across the room. Logan sighed once, closed his notebook, and finally turned toward me. His gray eyes looked tired rather than intimidating. "You can do the presentation," he said in a calm voice. "I will handle the research." That was it. No argument. No attitude. Before I could answer, he looked away again. It was nothing like the stories everyone told. When the bell rang, my best friend, Mason, nearly sprinted across the hallway to catch me. "Please tell me you are asking for another seat," he whispered. I shrugged. "He has not done anything." Mason blinked in disbelief. "Not yet." I laughed awkwardly, but his expression never changed. The rest of the day felt strange. Everywhere I went, someone seemed to ask about my new partner. Even students I barely knew offered advice. "Stay careful. Do not get involved. Keep your distance." By the time the final bell rang, I almost believed I should be afraid. As I packed my backpack, I realized I had left my history workbook in English class. I hurried back through the nearly empty hallway, expecting the room to be deserted. Instead, Logan was still there. He was stacking loose books into neat piles on Mrs. Harper's desk while she organized graded papers. "Thank you again," she told him with a warm smile. "I would still be here an hour from now without your help." Logan only nodded. "It is fine." His voice was quiet, almost shy. Before either of them noticed me, I stepped back into the hallway, suddenly feeling as though I had walked into a conversation I was never meant to hear. The boy everyone described as the biggest problem in school had stayed after class to help a teacher without expecting recognition. As I walked home beneath the golden light of the afternoon, I realized something that unsettled me far more than any rumor ever could. Either everyone in school had misunderstood Logan Carter, or I had only just begun seeing the part of him that nobody else ever bothered to notice. The semester project officially began the following afternoon, and Mrs. Harper gave every pair 40 minutes in the library to organize research before the weekend. The moment we walked through the doors, nearly every table filled with students laughing, comparing notes, or pretending to work while scrolling through their phones. Logan ignored all of it. He chose a quiet corner beside the tall windows overlooking the soccer field, pulled a notebook from his backpack, and began outlining our project with surprising precision. His handwriting was neat, every heading perfectly aligned, every source carefully listed before I had even opened my textbook. I watched him for a moment before finally asking, "Have you already read the novel?" He nodded without lifting his eyes. "Twice." I could not hide my surprise. "Then why do you never answer questions in class?" A faint smile appeared for less than a second. "Because everyone already expects the wrong answer." That single sentence stayed with me long after our study session ended. We finished more work in 30 minutes than I usually completed in an entire afternoon, yet Logan never once acted impatient or dismissive. Whenever I suggested an idea, he listened carefully before adding his own thoughts. It felt less like working with the most feared student in school and more like sitting beside someone who had quietly given up trying to prove himself. When the library closed, we packed our things and walked toward the parking lot together. Our paths separated at the front gate. "See you Monday," I said almost automatically. Logan hesitated before giving a small nod. "See you." It was probably the longest conversation we had shared so far, but somehow it felt important. Saturday morning, Grandma asked if I could deliver fresh strawberry jam and homemade pies to a neighborhood community center a few miles from our farm. I loaded everything into the back of her aging pickup truck and drove across town beneath a bright blue sky that promised the first real weekend of spring. After dropping off the boxes, I stopped at a small grocery store to pick up milk and bread. As I walked through the parking lot carrying 2 paper bags, I noticed a familiar figure loading groceries into an older sedan. Logan stood beside the trunk, carefully placing several reusable bags inside, while a little girl with curly brown hair laughed as she tried to hand him a stuffed rabbit almost as big as she was. "You forgot Mr. Buttons," she announced with complete seriousness. Logan accepted the toy as though it were the most valuable thing in the world and gently placed it beside her booster seat. "Thank you," he said. He almost missed the ride home. The little girl giggled so loudly that even an elderly couple walking nearby smiled. Logan reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face with remarkable patience before helping an older woman settle into the passenger seat. She looked tired, but her smile toward Logan carried unmistakable warmth. I instinctively stepped behind my truck before any of them noticed me. This was not the person everyone described in the school hallways. There was no anger, no arrogance, no hint of the reputation that seemed to surround him every weekday morning. There was only a teenager carrying groceries, making a little girl laugh, and quietly taking care of his family without expecting anyone to notice. As the sedan slowly pulled away, I realized I no longer wanted answers about the rumors. I wanted to know the real Logan Carter, because for the first time since we met, I was beginning to believe that the quietest version of him was also the truest. Monday arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Westbrook High. And for the first time in years, I found myself looking toward the back corner of the English classroom before I even sat down. Logan was already there, flipping through our research notes with the same quiet focus I had seen in the library. When I placed my backpack on the floor, He slid a folder across the desk without saying a word. Inside were neatly printed articles, highlighted passages, and handwritten notes organized by topic. "You did all of this over the weekend?" I asked. He shrugged as if it were nothing. "It needed to be finished." I smiled without thinking. "Thank you." For a brief moment, the corner of his mouth lifted before he returned to reading. That tiny reaction somehow felt like a much bigger victory than it should have. Unfortunately, other people had started noticing us too. By lunchtime, whispers seemed to follow me through every hallway. Some classmates stared openly, while others lowered their voices the second I walked past. Mason eventually caught up, with me outside the cafeteria carrying his lunch tray. "You have become the biggest mystery in school," he said. "Everyone wants to know why Logan Carter suddenly has a partner who actually talks to him." I laughed awkwardly. "We are only working on an assignment." Mason raised one eyebrow. "Then explain why he waited outside math class yesterday until you finished talking with your teacher." I blinked. "He did." Mason nodded slowly. "People noticed." The conversation stayed in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. Had Logan really been waiting for me? I could not remember seeing him outside the classroom, but then again I had been distracted organizing my notes. After the final bell, I headed toward the school library to return a reference book. As I stepped around the corner near the student council office, I overheard two seniors talking. "He is only pretending to be nice," one of them said quietly. "Just wait. He always disappoints people eventually." I stopped for half a second before continuing down the hallway. Their words bothered me more than I expected because they no longer matched the person I had actually come to know. Later that afternoon, Logan and I met at a small coffee shop near downtown to continue our project. The place smelled like cinnamon, fresh espresso, and warm bread, and soft music drifted through the speakers while rain tapped gently against the windows. We worked for nearly 2 hours without rushing. Every so often he asked for my opinion before adding another idea to our presentation. There was never any sign of the reckless troublemaker everyone described. Instead, he listened carefully, thanked the waitress politely, and even remembered my favorite blueberry muffin after hearing me mention it only once. As we packed our backpacks to leave, an older employee behind the counter smiled at Logan. "Tell your grandmother we hope she feels better soon," she said warmly. Logan returned the smile with quiet gratitude. "I will. Thank you." We stepped outside into the cool evening air, and the rain had almost stopped. Before walking toward the bus stop, Logan looked at me for a long moment. "You have not asked me about the rumors." I adjusted the strap on my backpack and met his eyes. "Because I would rather learn who you are than who everyone else thinks you are." He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked away toward the fading sunset, and for the first time since we met, I saw genuine surprise soften the guarded expression he always carried. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of us expected. Every afternoon after classes ended, Logan and I found another quiet place to work on our project. Sometimes it was the library. Sometimes it was the small coffee shop downtown. Other times we simply sat beneath the large maple tree near the edge of the football field where the afternoon breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass across campus. The conversation slowly became less about literature and more about ordinary life. I learned that Logan actually enjoyed old movies, collected secondhand vinyl records, and could name almost every constellation in the night sky because his grandfather had once taught him astronomy when he was little. None of those details matched the image that everyone else seemed determined to believe. One Thursday afternoon, our English presentation was finally finished. I closed my laptop with a satisfied smile. "I think Mrs. Harper is going to love this." Logan looked over the final slides and gave a quiet nod. "It is the best project I have ever turned in." I laughed softly. "That sounds like a compliment for both of us." He looked at me for a second before something unexpected happened. His serious expression faded, and a genuine smile appeared across his face. It was not forced or awkward. It was warm, relaxed, and so completely different from the guarded look he carried every day at school that I almost forgot to breathe. "Yes," he said. "I guess it is." I found myself smiling back without even realizing it. In that moment, the noisy cafeteria, the endless rumors, and every warning people had given me seemed to disappear. It was simply the two of us sharing a quiet victory over something small, yet somehow meaningful. As we packed our things, my phone buzzed with a message from Grandma asking whether I could stop by the farm before dinner. Because the first strawberries of the season were finally ready. I mentioned it without thinking. Logan's eyes brightened with genuine interest. Your family owns the strawberry farm? I nodded proudly. It has been in my family for 3 generations. He hesitated for a moment before asking, what does it smell like this time of year? The question caught me completely off guard. Most people asked how large the farm was or whether we made good money. Nobody had ever asked about the smell. I smiled. Like sunshine mixed with fresh rain and sweet fruit. You can tell you are almost there before you even see the fields. Logan looked down at the table with another small smile. That sounds nice. I tilted my head. You should visit someday. The invitation slipped out before I could second guess it. For a brief second, he seemed surprised, almost as though nobody had invited him anywhere in a very long time. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and the warmth in his expression quietly faded. I have to go, he said as he quickly slipped the phone back into his pocket. Everything all right? I asked. He forced a reassuring smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Just family stuff. He hurried toward the parking lot before I could ask anything else. I watched him leave, wondering what had changed in only a few seconds. The smile I had finally seen on his face lingered in my thoughts all evening. But so did the shadow that had replaced it. And for the first time since we became partners, I realized Logan was carrying something much heavier than the rumors everyone whispered about at school. The following week should have felt ordinary after we finished our presentation, but instead it seemed as though the entire school had suddenly become interested in every step Logan and I took together. If we arrived at English class a minute apart, someone noticed. If we happened to leave the library at the same time, someone whispered. I tried to ignore it because nothing about our friendship felt unusual to me anymore. We studied, shared ideas, and laughed occasionally. That was all. Still, rumors have a strange way of growing even when nobody feeds them. One afternoon, I opened my locker and found a folded piece of notebook paper resting on top of my history book. I unfolded it expecting homework or a reminder from a teacher, but instead it simply read, "Be careful who you trust." There was no signature. I looked around the hallway, but every student passing by acted as though nothing had happened. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the nearest recycling bin. When I met Logan after school, I decided not to mention it. He already carried enough on his shoulders without worrying about anonymous messages. We walked to the downtown coffee shop together, talking about everything except school. Logan told me his little sister, Lily, had earned the lead role in her elementary school music program and had spent the entire evening practicing songs around the house. He described how she insisted on performing every rehearsal in front of their grandmother, who applauded each performance as though it were opening night on Broadway. Listening to him tell the story, I realized something surprising. His voice became lighter whenever he talked about his family. The guarded walls around him quietly disappeared for a few minutes, replaced by genuine warmth. After we finished our drinks, I convinced him to stop by my grandmother's strawberry farm before sunset. It was only a short drive outside town, and the fields glowed beneath the soft orange light of early evening. The rows of strawberry plants stretched across the hillside like green ribbons dotted with bright red fruit. Grandma welcomed Logan with the same kindness she showed everyone else, handing each of us a small basket before reminding us to pick only the ripest berries. At first, Logan looked uncertain, but within minutes Lily's question from the week before echoed in my mind when he smiled at the sweet scent drifting through the air. He closed his eyes for a second and breathed in deeply. "You were right," he said quietly. "It really does smell like sunshine after the rain." I laughed. "I told you." We spent the next hour filling baskets while Grandma shared stories about the farm's history. Logan listened carefully to every word, asking thoughtful questions and thanking her for each story. Before we left, Grandma gently squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Your friend is Kind Eyes." Those simple words stayed with me during the drive back into town. As we reached the edge of the city, Logan looked out the passenger window before speaking almost to himself. I forgot places like this still existed. I glanced at him. "You can come back anytime." He smiled again, smaller this time, but no less sincere. "I would like that." Neither of us noticed the familiar student standing across the street near the gas station, quietly watching our truck disappear into the evening traffic. Already reaching for a phone as another rumor prepared to spread through Westbrook High before the next morning's first bell. By Tuesday morning, the rumors had reached every corner of Westbrook High. I knew it before I even reached my locker because conversations seemed to stop whenever I walked past. Some students looked curious. Others looked disappointed, as though I had somehow broken an invisible rule by becoming friends with someone they had already decided to judge. Mason caught up with me before first period and let out a quiet sigh. People are saying you spent the weekend alone with Logan outside town. I smiled faintly. I spent the afternoon picking strawberries with my grandmother, and Logan happened to visit. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. That is not the version everyone else is telling. I shook my head. Then maybe they should ask me instead of inventing stories. He studied my face for a moment before giving a small nod. You really trust him, do not you? I answered without hesitation. Yes. Even I was surprised by how quickly that word came out. During English class, Mrs. Harper returned our presentation with a large handwritten note praising our teamwork. It was the highest score in the class. A few students clapped politely, but the room felt strangely quiet. Logan accepted the paper without celebrating. He simply placed it inside his folder and whispered, "You did a great job." I smiled. We both did. For the first time, he did not immediately look away. Instead, he held my gaze for a second longer than usual before thanking me again. That afternoon, I expected us to stop by the coffee shop as always, but Logan packed his backpack unusually fast. I cannot today, he said softly. Something came up. I offered a friendly smile. Tomorrow works too. He nodded once and disappeared into the crowded hallway before I could ask another question. The same thing happened the next day, and the day after that. Every time I tried to catch him after class, he found a reason to leave early. During lunch, he started sitting at a different table. Between classes, he took different hallways. The distance appeared so suddenly that it felt unreal. I replayed every recent conversation in my mind, searching for something I might have said wrong, but I could not find anything. On Friday afternoon, I finally spotted him leaving the school parking lot just as I finished helping Mrs. Harper organize books. I hurried outside and called his name. He stopped walking but did not turn around immediately. When he finally faced me, the familiar warmth I had seen at the strawberry farm was gone. His expression was calm, almost carefully controlled. Did I do something? I asked quietly. Logan looked at the ground before answering. No. Then why are you avoiding me? Several long seconds passed before he spoke again. Because it is better this way. I stared at him, completely confused. Better for who? He forced a small smile that looked more painful than comforting. For you, Ethan. Before I could ask what he meant, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. Logan glanced toward the car, adjusted the strap of his backpack, and walked away with one final wave. I stood there beneath the fading afternoon sky, watching the distance between us grow with every step. The person who had slowly become the brightest part of my school days had just shut a door without explaining why, and somehow the silence hurt far more than any rumor ever could. The weekend felt longer than any I could remember. I kept telling myself that Logan probably needed time, that whatever had happened had nothing to do with me, but every time my phone lit up, I caught myself hoping to see his name. It never appeared. By Monday morning, the empty seat beside me in English class somehow felt louder than the conversations filling the room. Logan arrived just before the bell, quietly took his place, and spent the entire class looking at his notebook instead of the front of the room. When Mrs. Harper asked a question about the novel, he knew the answer. I could tell from the way his pencil paused above the page, but he stayed silent anyway. The distance between us was only a few inches, yet it felt impossible to cross. After class, I finally made up my mind that I was done guessing. I followed him into the hallway and caught up before he reached the stairs. Please, I said softly, just tell me the truth. Logan stopped walking. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway gradually emptied until only the sound of lockers closing echoed through the building. He took a slow breath before finally looking at me. You remember the rumors that started after we went to your grandmother's farm? I nodded. They have only gotten worse. He gave a faint smile without any happiness behind it. Some people took pictures of us that day. They sent them around school. They also found out where your grandmother's farm is. My heart sank. What does that have to do with us? Logan looked away toward the window overlooking the parking lot. Last week, someone left a note on my car saying I should stay away from you. Yesterday, another message showed up at my house. It said that if I cared about my family, I would stop dragging you into everyone's attention. My chest tightened. Why did you not tell me? Because I knew exactly what you would do, he answered quietly. You would stand beside me anyway. I could not deny it because he was right. He continued, his voice calm but heavy with exhaustion. You have spent your whole life earning people's trust. You have your grandmother, your farm, your friends, and a future that should stay bright. I already know what it feels like when people believe the worst about you. I did not want that becoming your life too. I stared at him, struggling to find the right words. All this time I had believed he was pushing me away because he regretted becoming my friend. Instead, he had been trying to protect everything I cared about. Logan, I said, you do not get to decide what friendships are worth keeping for someone else. His eyes met mine, filled with surprise and something softer that he quickly tried to hide. Before either of us could speak again, Mrs. Harper stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of books. She smiled warmly when she saw us together. There you two are? I was hoping to find you. The principal wants to recognize your project at Friday's academic assembly. It was selected as the best collaboration of the semester. Logan lowered his eyes immediately, but I could already tell what he was thinking. Standing beside me in front of the entire school was exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid, and yet for the first time since all of this began, I knew I was not willing to let him face that moment alone. Friday arrived beneath a bright blue sky that made the entire campus feel lighter than it had in weeks. Yet my heart refused to believe the day would be easy. Students filled the auditorium long before the academic assembly began, their conversations echoing across the rows of seats while teachers hurried through final preparations on stage. Logan stood beside me behind the curtain, holding the certificate folder Mrs. Harper had handed us only minutes earlier. He looked calm on the outside, but I noticed the way his fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the folder. We can still tell them you are not feeling well, I whispered. He shook his head with a small smile. Running away has never actually solved anything. Before I could answer, the principal called our names. We walked onto the stage together beneath a wave of applause. For a moment, I expected the whispers to begin again, but something unexpected happened instead. Mrs. Harper spoke first, explaining how two students with completely different reputations had created the strongest project of the semester because they listened to each other, trusted each other, and never stopped encouraging one another. As she finished speaking, the audience applauded again, louder this time. Looking out across the auditorium, I realized many of the same classmates who had believed every rumor were now simply watching us with quiet curiosity instead of judgment. After the ceremony ended, dozens of students gathered around to congratulate us. Some apologized for believing things they had heard without ever asking whether they were true. Others simply smiled and wished us luck on future projects. The weight that had been following Logan for so long seemed just a little lighter with every conversation. That afternoon, instead of going home immediately, we drove to my grandmother's strawberry farm. The fields stretched across the hillside exactly as they had the week before, glowing beneath the warm colors of an early summer sunset. Grandma welcomed us with fresh lemonade before quietly disappearing back toward the farmhouse, somehow knowing we needed a little time alone. Logan and I wandered between the rows of strawberry plants until we reached the small wooden bench overlooking the entire field. A gentle breeze carried the familiar sweet scent through the air. Logan smiled as he breathed it in. I think this is still my favorite place. I laughed softly. I had a feeling it might become one. For a few peaceful minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. Finally, Logan looked toward the horizon where the sun slowly dipped below the trees. I spent a long time believing that everyone who got close to me would eventually regret it, he admitted quietly. Then you kept proving me wrong. I turned toward him with a smile. Do you know what I realized? He looked back at me. What? I took a slow breath, feeling surprisingly calm. The first time we met, I thought you were the last person I would ever understand. Now you are the first person I want to tell about everything that happens in my day. His eyes widened for just a second before a genuine smile returned, warmer than any I had seen before. I have been wanting to tell you something too, he said. You changed the way I see myself. You reminded me that I am more than the stories people tell about me. Without another word, we stood together watching the last light settle across the strawberry fields, knowing neither of us could predict what the next school year would bring. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments that tested everything we had built, but for the first time, we would not have to face them alone. And as the evening breeze carried the sweet scent of summer through the quiet field, I realized that some of the best stories do not begin when two people meet. They begin the moment they decide to keep walking forward together.